The air in the makeshift recreation tent on forward operating base Chimera was a thick cocktail of opposing elements. It smelled of stale beer, scorched diesel fuel from the ever-present generators, and the fine, pervasive grit of the Kandahar desert, a powder so fine it worked its way into the very soul of a person. Fluorescent lights hummed a weary, monotonous tune from the canvas ceiling, casting a pale, unforgiving glare on the tired faces of the men scattered within. They were SEALs, operators from Naval Special Warfare Group 2, men who carried the weight of their own mythology like a second set of body armor. They were lions in a temporary dusty cage, and the air crackled with their contained energy, a mixture of boredom and lethal potential. They sat on battered folding chairs or leaned against plywood tables, their laughter loud and sharp, a defense against the crushing silence of the war that waited just outside the thin membrane of the tent flap. In a corner, away from the boisterous heart of the assembly, a figure sat alone. To the casual observer, she was an anomaly, a disruption in the expected pattern. She was a woman, for one, and in this particular fraternity, that alone was enough to draw the eye. But she did nothing to hold it. Her uniform was a standard set of multicam fatigues, clean but faded from sun and use, the rank insignia on her collar identifying her as a petty officer second class. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot, revealing a face that was neither plain nor beautiful, but simply present. It was a face devoid of makeup, of expression, of any signal that sought attention or approval. She was of average height and build, and she held a tablet in her hands, her eyes tracing lines of data with a placid intensity that seemed to wall her off from the rest of the room. Her name tag read, Thorn. She did not look up. She did not participate. She simply existed, a quiet island in a sea of masculine noise. Her stillness was a thing of substance, not a void, but a presence, like a deeply compressed spring, holding an impossible amount of potential energy within its coils. Holding court at the center of the largest group was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Cutler. He was a man chiseled from the very granite of special warfare cliché. His jaw was square, his neck was thick, and his arms were a tapestry of aggressive, often patriotic tattoos. He had served a dozen tours, collected a chest full of medals, and cultivated an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He was the alpha, the seasoned veteran, the man whose voice, a low, gravelly rumble, commanded immediate attention. His stories were heroic, his jokes were crude, and his opinions were delivered as incontrovertible fact. He was, in this small, isolated world, a king, and he ruled his temporary court with the casual tyranny of a man who had never been seriously challenged. His authority was built on a foundation of proven physical courage and a carefully curated reputation for being the toughest man in any room he entered. Cutler's gaze, sweeping his domain, eventually snagged on the quiet figure in the corner. He had seen her around the FOB for the past week, a ghost attached to some intelligence or signals unit, he presumed, a support technician, a data clerk. In his mind, she was one of the vast number of people who existed to facilitate the actions of important men like himself. He watched her for a long moment, his lip curling in a faint sneer of condescending amusement. Her focus on the tablet, her complete and utter disregard for the social gravity of the room, his gravity, was an affront. It was a silent, unintentional challenge to the natural order of things, as he understood them. He saw her not as a person, but as a symbol of the changing navy, a watering down of the warrior ethos he held sacred. He saw a box being ticked, a quota being met. He decided with the unthinking arrogance of a man long accustomed to being right, to make a point. He pushed himself away from the table, the legs of his chair scraping against the plywood floor. A hush fell over his audience as they sensed the shift in his attention. A new performance was about to begin. He ambled over to Thorne's table, his gait a proprietary swagger, and leaned over it, planting his thick, calloused hands on either side of her tablet. He was a mountain of a man, and his shadow fell over her, eclipsing the harsh, fluorescent light. The smell of him, sweat, chewing tobacco, and raw confidence, was an invasion. "Something interesting on that little screen, petty officer?" he began, his voice laced with a thick, syrupy condescension. It was the voice one might use for a child who had wandered into the adult section of the library. She did not startle. Her eyes lifted from the screen slowly, calmly, and met his. They were a cool, indeterminate shade of gray, and they held his gaze without fear, without deference, without any discernible emotion at all. It was like being looked at by a piece of high-precision machinery. "I'm reviewing satellite thermal imagery from the Sarposa Range, Chief." Her voice was as controlled and even as her gaze. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered without inflection. The directness of her answer, its technical nature, seemed to annoy Cutler. He had expected a flustered response, a stammer, an apology for existing in his space. He had not received it. He pressed on, determined to elicit the reaction he felt he was owed. "Satellite imagery, huh? That's a big word. You know, back in my day, we didn't have fancy tablets. We had maps, a compass, and the dirt between our teeth. We did real work, men's work." The chorus of his followers chuckled appreciatively. The lesson was proceeding as planned. Thorne's expression did not change. Her gaze did not waver. She offered no defense, no argument. She simply absorbed his words, her silence a mirror that reflected his own bluster back at him. This unnerving calm was more infuriating to Cutler than any retort could have been. He felt the need to escalate, to crack the placid surface of her composure and find the fear or anger he knew must be hiding underneath. He felt the eyes of his men on him, and his reputation as the unshakable alpha was now at stake. He could not be seen to be ignored by this data clerk. "You know, the thing is," he continued, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, "this place, out here, it's a sharp environment. It's not for everyone. It's not a place for distractions. People can get hurt when they're not focused on what matters." He gestured vaguely toward the tent flap, toward the war beyond. He was implying that her very presence was a liability, a danger to the serious men doing serious work. He was questioning her right to even breathe the same dusty air. For the first time, she responded with more than a simple statement. "My focus is unwavering, Chief Cutler." Again, the words were flat, clinical. It was not a boast. It was a diagnostic report. This was too much. Her refusal to be intimidated, to play her assigned role in his drama, was a direct challenge to his authority. He felt a hot surge of anger. He reached out and, with a flick of his thick finger, tapped the screen of her tablet, shutting it off. The screen went black. "Maybe you need to focus on showing a little respect for the people who actually keep you safe." The room was silent now. The casual banter had died completely. Every eye was on the two figures in the corner. They were watching a lion corner a field mouse, and they waited for the inevitable bloody conclusion. They saw a chief, a legend in their community, being defied by a quiet, unassuming second-class technician. The outcome was preordained. Thorne looked down at the blank screen of her tablet. Then she looked back up at him. Her face remained a mask of professional neutrality. She did not flinch. She did not turn. She did not raise her voice. She simply held his gaze, and in the profound, unnerving depths of her silence, Cutler felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. It was as if he were yelling at a cliff face, and the cliff face was not only refusing to crumble, but was somehow judging him for the effort. He mistook the feeling for a need to assert more dominance. He slammed his hand down on the table, a loud crack that made several of the younger SEALs jump. The tablet bounced. The metal legs of the table groaned. "I am talking to you, petty officer. You will look at me and you will answer me with a 'Yes, Chief,'" he roared, his face now inches from hers. Spittle flew from his lips. He was performing his rage, magnifying it for the benefit of his audience. And then it happened. The world outside the tent decided to participate in the drama. A piercing, rising shriek tore through the air, a sound that bypassed the ears and sank its teeth directly into the primal brainstem. It was the unmistakable incoming wail of rocket-propelled grenades. Before the first impact, the very fabric of the base's reality was shredded. The camp-wide alarm blared to life, a frantic, synthetic scream that layered on top of the incoming rockets. A split second later, the ground bucked like a living animal. The first rocket impacted the perimeter wall 100 meters away, a deafening crump that vibrated through the soles of their boots and rattled their teeth. The fluorescent lights in the tent flickered, then died, plunging the room into the chaotic gloom of emergency battery lighting. Chaos erupted. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the rec room dissolved into instinct. Men who were moments ago laughing and joking were now moving with the brutal efficiency of their training. They grabbed rifles, checked gear, and shouted information over the din. Their response was fast, it was aggressive, but it was also disjointed. Squad leaders were yelling orders that conflicted with the commands of the base defense officer crackling over the loudspeakers. Men were running to their assigned rally points, but the nature of the attack was unclear. Was it a probe? A full-scale assault? Was it coming from the south or the east? Confusion was a tangible fog, as thick as the dust now filling the air from the nearby explosion. Chief Cutler, his personal drama with Thorne instantly forgotten, reacted as he always did, with loud, decisive action. He began bellowing orders, gathering his team, his voice a powerful instrument of command that had served him well in countless firefights. "Bravo team, with me. We secure the west gate. Charlie, provide overwatch from the tower. Move, move, move!" He was a creature of kinetic energy, his body and mind hardwired for the violent simplicity of a direct engagement. He was a hammer, and every problem was a nail. But this was not a simple nail. A second and third rocket impacted closer this time, one hitting the mess hall with a sickening metallic crunch and a bloom of orange fire that was visible through the tent flap. The shriek of small arms fire began to stitch the night, a deadly conversation between the attackers and the perimeter guards. Over the radio, frantic, panicked voices overlapped. "Multiple points of contact. They're inside the wire at Sector Gamma. Heavy machine gun fire from the ridgeline. We have casualties at the aid station, need immediate support." The base command net was a cacophony of panicked reports, a system on the verge of collapse. The conventional authority was failing. Their response was a series of disconnected reactions, not a cohesive strategy. They were losing control, and in the midst of this maelstrom, Petty Officer Thorne moved. She had not jumped. She had not shouted. As the first rocket screamed overhead, her body had tensed for a microsecond, a flicker of acknowledgement, and then she had shifted. It was not a frantic scramble, but a movement of such profound, liquid efficiency that it seemed to slow time around her. She rose from her chair in a single, fluid motion. Her eyes, which had been placid moments before, were now alight with a terrifying, cold fire. They scanned the chaos not with fear, but with an all-consuming, analytical hunger. She was not seeing panicked men. She was seeing tactical assets. She was not hearing noise. She was parsing data streams. She moved to a communications console at the edge of the tent, a secondary node that was rarely used. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her movements economical and precise. She was not typing. She was playing a complex instrument. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. She bypassed the overwhelmed local command channel, patching directly into the Joint Operations Center feed. She pulled up drone surveillance feeds, thermal imaging, and signals intelligence intercepts in a series of windows on the main monitor. The chaos of the battle began to resolve itself into a clear, terrifying picture on her screen. It was not a random assault. It was a coordinated, multi-pronged attack designed to overwhelm the base's defenses through systematic paralysis. Chief Cutler, about to lead his men out into the fray, paused. He saw the glow from the console and the woman standing before it, her back to him. He saw the tactical map materializing on the screen, a map far more detailed and current than anything the command post was likely seeing. He started to bark an order at her, to get her away from the important equipment, but the words died in his throat. Because she began to speak. She had slipped on a headset, and her voice, the same calm, inflectionless voice from before, cut through the noise. But now, it was not the voice of a passive technician. It was the voice of pure, unadulterated command. It was a voice that did not request or suggest. It stated tactical reality as if calling it into being. "All stations, this is Spectre," she said, her voice a blade of ice in the hot, panicked air. The call sign was unfamiliar, a ghost on the net. "Cease broadcast on local command. Acknowledge." There was a moment of confused silence on the radio, then a few hesitant clicks of acknowledgement. Her authority, unearned by rank or introduction, was simply absolute. It was the innate authority of someone who sees the entire board while everyone else is staring at a single piece. "Mortar teams," she continued, her eyes tracing the heat signatures of the enemy on her screen. "Execute fire mission Whiskey Tango 3. Target grid 045-981. Danger close. I have friendlies 40 meters west. They need that fire now. Air support, call sign Warlock. You are cleared hot. Your target is a technical mounting a DSK on the eastern ridgeline. Coordinates to follow. Fire on my mark. Electronic warfare? I need you to jam frequencies from 30 to 90 megahertz. We are picking up enemy command signals. Do it now." The men in the tent, including Cutler, stood frozen. They were witnessing something that did not compute. A petty officer second class was not just giving orders. She was conducting a symphony of violence. She was coordinating artillery, close air support, and electronic warfare with the casual mastery of a seasoned battle commander. Her language was a foreign tongue of expertise, a clinical lexicon of death and strategy that left no room for doubt or hesitation. She saw the enemy mortars setting up behind a small hill. She saw the heavy machine gun suppressing the main gate. She saw the infiltration team that had breached the wire at Sector Gamma and was moving to flank the barracks. She saw it all, and she began to dismantle the attack, piece by meticulous piece. "Warlock, you are clear. Mark." A moment later, the distant guttural roar of a warthog's cannon tore the night apart, a sound like God ripping canvas. A bright flash illuminated the eastern ridge, and the heavy machine gun fire ceased abruptly. Mortar teams, good effects on target. Shift fire, grid 047-983, fire for effect. Sector Gamma defenders, the infiltration team is moving through the southern drainage ditch. They will be on your flank in 90 seconds. Intercept. Chief Cutler stood mesmerized. His own plan, a brave but simplistic charge to the west gate, was revealed for what it was: a fool's errand. He would have led his men into a perfectly prepared kill zone. This woman, this Spectre, had seen the entire trap. She was not fighting the battle in front of her. She was fighting the battle 3 moves ahead. The other SEALs were equally stunned, their rifles held at low ready, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning, profound awe. They were watching a masterclass, a demonstration of competence so far beyond their own experience that it bordered on the supernatural. Her calm was not passivity. It was the utter lack of wasted energy. It was the calm of a hurricane's eye, a point of absolute stillness around which a storm of perfectly directed violence raged. The tide of the battle began to turn. The panicked chatter on the radio was replaced by the calm, clipped acknowledgments of units following Spectre's commands. The random chaos of the defense coalesced into a focused, lethal response. The enemy attack, which had been on the verge of catastrophic success, faltered. Their coordination was shattered by the jamming. Their key heavy weapon assets were eliminated. Their infiltration teams were ambushed and neutralized. Within 10 minutes of Spectre taking command, the complex assault had been broken into a series of desperate, failing skirmishes. Just as the last pockets of resistance were being wiped out, a new presence entered the tent. The flap was thrown open, and a figure strode in, flanked by 2 immense, stone-faced commandos. He was a tall man, lean and wiry with age, but he moved with a predatory grace that belied the 2 stars on his collar. This was Major General Maddox, the commander of all special operations in the theater. His face, which looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, was a mask of grim fury. He had raced here from the main command post, expecting to find a command structure in shambles. He was here to take charge, to stop the bleeding. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scene. The stunned SEALs, the shell-shocked expression on Chief Cutler's face, and the lone figure at the communications console, her back still to the room, calmly directing the final cleanup operations. All call signs, report status. Watch for secondary IEDs on the egress routes. Medevac is inbound for the casualty collection point. Spectre out. She finished her transmission and finally turned from the console. General Maddox's eyes fell upon her, and he opened his mouth to demand, in a voice that could strip paint from a bulkhead, just who in the hell she thought she was. But the words never came. His eyes, honed by decades of assessing threats and allies, narrowed slightly. He saw the anonymous petty officer second-class fatigues, the unremarkable face. And then he saw it. As she turned, the sleeve of her uniform shifted, revealing a few inches of her left forearm. There, just above the wrist, was a tattoo. It was small, no larger than a coin, and starkly simple in its design. It was a single 5-pointed star, inked in solid, unforgiving black, nothing else. The general froze. It was not a dramatic, theatrical gesture. It was a complete and utter cessation of all movement, as if his nervous system had been severed. His breath hitched. His eyes, which had been blazing with anger, were now wide with a look of utter, profound disbelief, quickly followed by something else entirely. A deep and abiding reverence. The two commandos flanking him, giants clad in tactical gear, saw the look on his face, and they too went rigid, their professional instincts screaming that they had just walked into a room with a power far greater than their own generals. The air in the tent became thick, heavy, and sacred. Chief Cutler and the other SEALs watched, their confusion mounting. They saw only a simple star tattoo. They could not understand why a two-star general, a man who commanded armies and answered only to the highest echelons of government, was looking at this unassuming woman as if he had just seen a ghost or a god. General Maddox took a slow, deliberate step forward. He swallowed, the sound loud in the sudden ringing silence. He brought his heels together with an audible click. His back went ramrod straight. He raised his right hand to his brow in a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cut glass. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer. It was a gesture of profound, almost fearful respect. It was the salute one gives not to rank, but to legend. "Ma'am," General Maddox said, his voice a strained, humbled whisper. I did not know you were in country. My apologies." The word hung in the air, an ideological bomb that shattered the reality of every man in that tent. "Ma'am, not petty officer, not Thorne. Ma'am," the address of a subordinate to a superior. A two-star general was addressing a petty officer second class as ma'am. The universe had just been turned inside out. Chief Cutler felt his blood run cold. His mind, which had been struggling to process the woman's tactical genius, now completely short-circuited. The tattoo, the general's reaction, the call sign, Spectre. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture so terrifying and humbling that he felt his knees weaken. The narrator's voice would later fill in the gaps for those who were not there, and for those who were but could never know the full truth. Petty Officer Second Class Thorne was a cover identity, a piece of administrative camouflage so deep it was functionally invisible. The woman known as Spectre was not a member of the Navy, not in any traditional sense. She was a direct action operator for a unit that did not officially exist, a Tier 0 entity known only by a code name within the highest, most classified circles of national security. Her rank was irrelevant because she operated entirely outside the conventional chain of command, answering only to a select committee on the National Security Council. The black star on her arm was not a tattoo. It was a marker. It signified her as one of perhaps a dozen individuals on the planet who were given plenipotentiary authority in matters of existential threat. She was a strategic weapon in human form, a scalpel used to excise threats that nations could not even acknowledge, let alone fight. Her file was a ghost. Her accomplishments were myths whispered in hushed tones in secure facilities. The averted nuclear crisis in Eastern Europe, the decapitation of 3 separate terrorist organizations in a single night, the silent infiltration of fortified compounds that entire armies could not breach. She was not a SEAL. To say she was a SEAL would be like calling a thermonuclear device a firecracker. She looked at General Maddox, and for the first time, a flicker of something, perhaps weariness, perhaps faint amusement, touched her eyes. She returned his salute with a lazy, almost dismissive flick of her fingers to her brow. "It's not your country to know in, General. Stand easy." Her voice was soft, but the command was absolute. Maddox lowered his hand, though his posture remained rigid, his eyes still wide with awe. Spectre's gaze then moved, sweeping past the general, past the stunned commandos, and settled on Chief Petty Officer Marcus Cutler. The condescension and arrogance were gone from his face, replaced by a pale, sickly mask of dawning horror. He was not just looking at a superior officer. He was looking at the living embodiment of a level of lethality he had previously thought only existed in fiction. He had not just insulted a colleague, he had poked a sleeping dragon. She walked toward him, her footsteps silent on the dusty floor. She stopped a few feet in front of him. The entire population of the tent seemed to hold its collective breath. They expected a reckoning. They expected him to be verbally flayed, professionally destroyed, perhaps even physically struck. They expected the wrath of the revealed goddess. Instead, she spoke to him in that same, unnervingly calm voice. "Chief Cutler," she began, the words precise and clinical, like a surgeon describing a tumor. "Your behavior earlier was not a personal failing. I'm not offended. It was a tactical failure. Your primary error was one of faulty intelligence gathering. You made an assumption based on incomplete and biased data, my gender, my rank, my demeanor. You failed to properly assess a potential asset in your area of operations." She took another step closer. "Your second failure was one of emotional control. Your anger, your need to assert dominance, it clouded your judgment and made you predictable. An enemy could have used that against you, could have baited you into a fatal mistake. As, in a sense, I did. Your pride became a tactical vulnerability for you and every man under your command. Today, it almost led you to march your team into a prepared ambush." Each word was a perfectly placed scalpel cut, dissecting his arrogance and laying bare the professional incompetence at its core. She was not punishing him. She was teaching him. She was recalibrating his entire worldview. "You are a strong warrior, Chief," she said, and the compliment was more damning than any insult. "You are a fine weapon, but you are a dull one. You lack finesse. You rely on brute force when precision is required. That is a flaw that can be corrected through education." She turned her head slightly, addressing the still at attention General Maddox without looking at him. "General, I am requisitioning Chief Cutler. He will be attached to my operational support staff, effective immediately. I have a need for a logistics coordinator." The term logistics coordinator was delivered with the faintest hint of irony. It was clear she meant something else entirely. A student, an apprentice, a project. Maddox simply nodded, his face grim. "Consider it done, ma'am." He knew what this meant. It was a fate far more profound than any court-martial. Cutler would not be punished in a way the Navy understood. He would be remade. He would spend the foreseeable future in the direct orbit of this woman, forced to witness a standard of excellence so far above his own that his pride would be systematically dismantled, atom by atom, and rebuilt into something new. Humility, forged in the crucible of overwhelming competence. The story of that night on FOB Chimera passed into the quiet lore of the special operations community. It became a fable, a teaching tool whispered in training camps and quiet bars where such men gather. The details, as they always do, grew with each telling. In some versions, she killed a dozen men with her bare hands. In others, she called down lightning from a clear sky. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. The night that a loud, arrogant chief was humbled, and a quiet, anonymous woman saved them all. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, a modern morality play with rifles and radios. Years passed. The dust of Kandahar was replaced by the salt spray of Coronado. In the center of a training ground, a group of young, eager SEAL candidates were being instructed by a new kind of teacher. He was a master chief now. his face lined with the hard-earned wisdom of a man who has seen the world, and more importantly, has seen himself. His voice was no longer a boastful roar, but a quiet, confident rumble. It was Marcus Cutler. He stood before his students, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let me tell you a story," he would begin, and the recruits would lean in, hungry for a tale of heroism. "It's about the most dangerous person I ever met. This person didn't have the biggest muscles. They didn't have the loudest voice. They didn't have a chest full of medals you could see. They taught me that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield is the one you don't see coming, the one you underestimate." He would then tell them the story of that night. He would not spare himself. He would paint a picture of his own arrogance, his own foolishness, with brutal honesty. He made himself the cautionary tale. He taught them that true strength is not the power to dominate others, but the discipline to control oneself. He taught them that authority is not worn on a collar or shouted in a command, but is earned through quiet, undeniable competence. He taught them to look past the uniform, the gender, the rank, and to assess the individual. His greatest lesson, the one he hammered home with the fervor of a convert, was the one he had learned at the feet of the Master. His humiliation had become his salvation, and he now used it to forge better warriors than he had ever been. The story, in its essence, is a lesson for us all, far beyond the confines of military bases and battlefields. It is a reminder that in any room, in any organization, in any walk of life, the loudest voice is rarely the most important. True ability, true power, does not need to advertise. It is quiet, it is observant, and it is patient. It waits. It lets the loud and the arrogant exhaust themselves, lets them reveal their weaknesses and their fragile egos. And then, when the moment of crisis arrives, it acts. It does not act for glory or for recognition, but for the simple, irrefutable purpose of solving the problem. It is a force that is felt long before it is seen, an authority that is obeyed long before it is understood. Let your actions be your argument. Let your competence be your creed. For in the end, the world is not shaped by the boastful, but by the quiet professionals who, without fanfare or applause, simply get the job done.